Full Bloom is brought to you in part by the following. Welcome to Full Bloom, the award-winning show that celebrates life. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Full Bloom. I'm Zita Christian. If you're like me, you're fascinated by crystals, candles, crystal balls, tea leaves, tarot cards, and I have a special guest for you tonight who is going to illuminate one of those in particular, the tarot card. My guest is Randy Ouellette, a tarot card reader. Randy, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thank you very much.
When you agreed to be on the show, I sat down to jot down some questions, and there were so many things that I want to talk about. So we're going to jump right in here. For the basics, for the benefit of some people in the audience who might not know what tarot cards are. What are the cards? And I'm hoping that maybe you could pick them up here and show. We'll get our trusty cameraman over here to pick up some of these, and you could tell us about them as you show us the pictures.
Well, tarot cards, for me, are about telling a story. Every card tells a story, and I don't look at so much what is in here, because this is an example of Pentacles, which is about money. But for me, this is saying that something you started, you need to finish. So it's how I see every card for me has a story to it.
So you don't have to really know anything about the traditional history of the cards. You can make an interpretation, tell a story yourself by looking at the card itself.
And it's all an intuitive piece of what it tells you, but it's not just a single card. It's all the cards together and what they mean for that piece of story. That's how it works for me. Other people, it's different. You have readers out there who are what I call go by the book tarot readers, like his star. Star, I always call star like the light at the end of the tunnel. And if you look at that here, it's the water coming down, and it's supposed to be, say, like replenishment or replenishing. Queen of Pentacles. In a book, I might say about her, this is a woman who works with money. But for me, I just see it as a very nice lady here. But it would have to be the other cards around it of what's going on for her. So
it's not something in isolation. You are taking everything around it and telling the story.
Right.
I just want to point out before we go any further that the images you're showing are from a deck traditionally called the Rider-Waite deck. As a feminist, I would argue that it be termed correctly the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And that is, Rider was the publisher. The deck was published in December of 1909. Waite was the mystic who divined the meanings behind the cards. And Pamela Coleman Smith illustrated the cards. And how fortunate we were. You know how things just sometimes work out for a reason. Randy and I have been in contact for, months, waiting to get this show scheduled. We finally got it scheduled, and by one of those beautiful coincidences, it turns out that the copyright on the images on the cards expired in December of 2012, so we are free to show the images, which is wonderful because they're gorgeous. I wanted to be sure that you got to see some of them. Now, this deck that you're using here, where did this deck come from?
Well, this was a deck that was my mother's deck. My mother, Shirley, was not a tarot card reader. She read playing cards like my grandmother did. And when my mother had passed, this deck was in her bureau drawer. This was a gift that a friend of hers had given her. But she didn't do tarot cards, and neither did my grandmother. So when I found this deck, her deck, I say her deck, that deck became my deck. And so I've used it ever since. And that was 2008 when she passed.
Well, now, you mentioned there that your mother and your grandmother both read cards. And, I've mentioned on this show before, I have a plaque in my kitchen that says, "Home is where your story begins." And I do believe that. So you picked up something from the mother and your grandmother. But what you said, and I want to be sure that we address it, you said they read playing cards.
Yeah.
Just ordinary
Regular deck of playing cards.
Deck of playing cards. In fact, I know we have a couple decks just propped over on the side there, and I'm sure anybody has seen regular playing cards.
Yeah.
But there is a correlation in terms of the suits and the cards. Could you talk about what that correlation is between the tarot and the playing cards?
Well, as far as the pentacles go, which
sometimes called coins.
Coins are about money, traditionally. Here we are.
There's
Here's one here. So in the playing cards, it would be the diamonds.
The diamonds.
Okay. Then you have the rods. Okay. And these are in the minor arcana. These would be related to the clubs.
The clubs.
Which is usually about work and business. Okay. Then we have, let me just pull this guy out here. We have the swords. Okay. And the swords are related to the spades. And spades are usually considered not to be the happiest cards in the deck.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have the hearts. Okay, we have the cups here. And cups are related to the hearts.
In the regular
in
playing
a regular
deck.
playing card deck.
Okay. So my understanding is that, centuries ago, people used the tarot cards in the same way people to this day use playing cards, that they were a game, and then other things developed from them. Tell us a little bit about the difference between the major arcana and the minor, because you just mentioned about the 4 suits being part of the minor arcana. So what are the differences?
You have 22, they're called the 22 major arcana. And from what I understand, as far as those are concerned, that's supposed to be, they start with the Fool and then they end with the World. And so the Fool begins the journey and the World ends the journey. And the World card is a card where it has the wreath in it. And it's always about things coming and how life comes full circle.
Full circle.
So it's about the journey of life, where life begins, your journey, and then all those cards relate to your journey through.
It's like the big picture.
Yeah.
And I, from what I understand too, the word arcana is an old card that means the knowledge. So this is the knowledge of your life experience.
Right.
But it's the big picture.
Yeah, the big picture.
Okay, so then you have the minor arcana, and that's where we get the cups and the rods and the swords and the pentacles, corresponding to the hearts and spades and clubs and diamonds. And what do they represent in a reading?
Well, like in the playing cards, those represent all those cards or the playing card would in those ways. So you have, like I said, the rods are the clubs, hearts are the cups, coins are
Diamonds.
the diamonds, and the swords are the spades. The one interesting difference is that if you lay out each minor arcana, like the cups, you start with the ace to the king. Okay, you have those in the playing cards. The one that you don't have is the you have the knights.
The pages.
The pages. You don't have the pages.
Yeah.
So that's what's missing from the playing cards.
Okay.
And pages usually are about giving a message, or there's a message about that certain thing coming.
Well, that was the perfect segue because I wanted to, for a lot of us who have had many readings over the years with a number of different people, I read for myself. I have a collection of tarot cards, some for the artwork, some for the interpretations by the people who created the cards. But when you're doing a reading, when somebody comes to you for a reading, what do they generally want? What are they looking for?
When someone calls, that's another good segue, because a gentleman just called me yesterday to set up for a reading.
Yeah.
And so I made the appointment, and then he starts talking about what he hopes to get out of the reading. And I went, no. I says, I don't want to hear your whole story, because I like to tell the story when they come. I don't want to know all this information, because if someone gives you too much information, then they're going to think, well, geez, I already told him this and I told him that. He's just saying that because I already told him this.
Right.
So I would rather not know what's going on. But what I do is in a reading is I do the basic reading, and then I give them time to ask questions during the reading. I always ask them before we begin if you have questions to ask as the reading goes on or comments to make. Please ask questions or make comments if you'd like to during the reading. It's helpful to me, and this is just my stuff, to know that I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And I've read for some people in a 30-minute reading where they sit there and they're like, and I'm like,
are we making connections
I'm like,
here?
okay. And then they'll say, you know what, everything you said was really on the money. And I'm like, help me along.
I don't think, I think sometimes you get people who are skeptics, and they sit down and they think, well, this is going to be a test of the reader. And it's not. This is a partnership.
Yeah.
This is like, how can this work? How can we get something
And
together?
if you're going to be, in that respect, if you're going to be skeptical and spend the money, I'd rather have you spend it and spend it wisely.
Yeah.
And not be skeptical. I mean, I think it's good to have skepticism, but also have an open mind and be open, because there's lots of possibilities of what's down here. I mean, it's 78 cards.
Yeah, quite a lot of stories to be told.
A lot of stories in there.
Just tying on that idea of skepticism just for a minute, at the extreme, you could have someone who is doing a reading who is scamming someone.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. How would somebody be able, who is going for a reading, spot a scam, and what do you do about it?
Well, I had a young lady I did a reading for, and she went to a lady who claimed she didn't speak any English, so she had her interpreter with her because she only spoke Spanish.
Okay.
And everything was all negative. And for me as a reader, I tell people what's going on. If I see negative things, I tell them, but it's not always a lot in there. But a reading should be a mix of positive and some negative things. If everything comes out negative, that's a little hint. If they say things like, well, they told this girl, she was just married, and she was told that you got to have children in 5 years. And she says, oh my God, she was right. And I said, what do you mean? Well, I went home and, some months went by and I got pregnant. And I'm like, well, most people who get married have kids. But the other big scam to always watch out for is about candles, and that you have some kind of, black cloud over your head. And you need to come back and light these candles that cost hundreds of dollars. And they do a ritual. And the reading may cost $30. But they make their money on the scam. Because
they instill fear.
They instill a lot of fear.
And then you pay to have this bad energy removed.
And the other part,
don't go there.
And the other part too is, a reading, they shouldn't be saying things like, oh, I got a sense someone in your family has an illness coming on, if not now, soon. Or there's some money trouble. Or, there's going to be some car difficulties coming up for you, if not now, soon. Those are things that everyone has happen. Issues with family. So those are common things. So when someone says things like that, they're really grabbing at straws, because what they want you to do is to say, oh my God, yeah, my car and this and that. Yeah. And another thing some people do is they watch the face, and it's the body language. So if your face lights up and they watch your eyes.
Oh, more of that. Yeah.
And that's another hint for them they're on the right track. So it's just those little tiny things just to be aware of. And it's always good to ask for, for recommendations from other clients,
Speaking of such things, about recommendations, I know you brought with you a picture of your mom and a picture in the little tiny oval of your grandmother. And I was thinking, when we were talking the other day about how different it is for a reader today, as opposed to what it would have been like at the time that your grandmother was doing readings. So could you talk with us a little about the differences?
Oh, sure. I know that when my grandmother read, there was no business cards. There was no advertising, and that back then, you didn't have the internet. This is back in the 70s. And so it was all word of mouth. and that's all you had. And like I was saying, is that even back then, you didn't hear the words like Reiki, you didn't hear the words like life coach, you didn't have the angel cards back then. You had the tarot cards and you had the playing cards. Some used the Ouija board. You had tea leaves. Those are very popular. Numerology. It's so different today, where you have the internet and you have these magazines and newspapers, and they didn't none of that was around when my grandmother read, and it was all word of mouth.
Well, I think too, though, that one of the reasons was that people, they wouldn't talk about it openly.
Right,
you would be afraid to, have a little card made up or put an ad or something, or put a sign on your door or something to say that you were a tarot reader. In many states, even today, a reader has to say this is for entertainment purposes only. You have to be very specific that you're not making any other kind of claim. I understand the benefit of that. I get that. But I hate to think of a time, and not all that long ago, when a person who had a gift at reading the story in the cards had to be afraid of being arrested.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't ever remember that was a fear of my grandmother's or even of my mother's. But certainly when my mother was doing it, things were really changing and moving along differently. And you could really see the difference. And that's when you had metaphysical magazines, you had newspapers, and then you heard all these other, the Reiki. And when I first opened a metaphysical paper and saw Reiki, I'm like, what's Reiki? What is this? And didn't know what it was, So it's very interesting how it's all kind of come to where it is now. And even then, you had some books.
A few
books. But now it's like, there's so many books.
The whole section in bookstores.
And like I said, too, you didn't have Sylvia Browne.
Right.
You didn't have John Edwards. You didn't have James Van Prague's. You didn't have any of that. It was very hush, hush, hush.
Do you think, because we do have those popular people, icons in that world now, that the idea of reading cards, of intuition, intuitive readings, of mediumship in particular, the idea of talking with spirits who have crossed over, that's more acceptable?
I really think so, and I think it's become more of a normal now. And you still have people out there that when you talk about it, like even for me at work, I mean, when I first started my job, 10 years ago, it's like, gee, do I say this, or do I tell people, or who do I tell and not tell? But it's certainly more acceptable and popular than what it used to be when my grandmother started.
So when your grandmother was reading, and you were a kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, and describe a little to me, like what that was like in your home.
Well, it wasn't in our home. It was in her home.
Okay.
And I can always remember, she had the 2-bedroom apartment, and she had it was the combined living room, dining room section. And so she would be sitting at the dining room table, and she would be babysitting sometimes for me and my brother, and she'd have mostly all ladies who she would read for. And, we'd be sitting there, my brother in the living room, having the TV on low, or coloring or whatever, and, there she is right over there reading for people. And so...
And did people laugh? Did they cry? Do you remember any kind of reactions from...
I don't really remember anyone laughing or crying. I just remember it always seemed kind of intense when she would do it. It was always very quiet. But it was always interesting because there were certain things my grandmother did as a reader. The shuffling the cards was always important. Cutting them in 3 piles with the left hand.
The receiving hand, okay.
And putting them back together, the way she would deal the cards out. And I do the same as she does, especially with the playing cards, is holding the cards. I don't hold the tarot cards, I lay them down. But for me, when I hold the playing cards, I make a better connection when I hold them than laying them down.
Interesting. I want to ask you about a few specific cards, because you see how it is, Randy, in the movies, and there'll be some scene in the movie where there's a tarot reader, and of course the suspense is building, and immediately they zoom in either on the death card or the hanged man or one of the other, people get a little scary looking at some of those cards, and you've got the 5 that cause the most trepidation when they show up in a reading, and we've got a lineup of them here. When I have the camera take a look at them,
Sure.
Could you tell us a little about each one of those cards and what I don't say what the interpretation really is, because it depends on a whole reading.
Right.
But what is the more positive interpretation of those cards?
Sure. I'll try it. Some of them on positive. I'll try.
Okay.
Can't guarantee on. Well, I'm going to start here with the devil.
Okay.
Okay. And people see that card, and I have to say to them, it's not that you're being possessed by the devil.
Right.
For me, he's always about obsession.
Yes.
Always about obsession.
I think of that as well.
In other words, overdoing a good thing. Okay? Next is the death card. And I always tell people, especially people who've never had a reading before and it pops up, I say, this is a good card. Death is about change and transformation.
Yes.
So it's death of a situation and the birth of a new situation.
The same information you could apply to the death card that you might to a butterfly.
Sure.
The death and the transformation is just that the butterfly is prettier and whatever.
Right.
But it's that same energy.
Yeah. It's
Something
same
has
thing.
to die for something else to be born.
Same exact thing.
Okay, and then the one in the middle.
The tower.
Yeah.
Okay, I always tell people that this is about chaos, but necessary chaos, because it brings change also, because it's about things being stagnant too long, and something in the works is causing chaotic change to happen that you don't want to have happen. Okay. This is the Ten of Swords.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I always tell people this. I call it the Phoenix Rising card. And I say, well, it doesn't look good because they have all these swords sticking out of their back. I say, but if you look closely, the sun's coming up. Okay?
Yes.
So what this is saying to me is that you've gotten to the lowest point you can go, and now you can only go upwards.
There you go. There's only one way.
Yep,
Okay,
one
I
way
like
up.
that. It won't get any worse than that.
Right. The hangman, people think it's upside down, but it's not, because he is actually upside down. My interpretation of the hangman is one of think outside the box, because you're seeing things from a different point of view.
Yeah, you sure are.
Yeah, you can't help
Okay.
it. So
when somebody has a reading, and they've come to you for a reading, and suddenly the hangman pops up, or the tower, or the death card, for people who have had readings before, I think they're comfortable with
Right.
that. But for the person who isn't, I want to get into a little bit about that average person who's coming in the first time for a reading. What do you tell them about? In fact, you have something on your website about tips for insight and enjoyment of a reading. What do you advise people?
well, I always tell people that for any kind of reading you go for, to always be open. Keep an open mind about the information. Okay, and again, that little bit of skepticism is always good. Okay, but always know that even though you're getting this reading done, this is not written in stone. Okay, this is just like a map of what could happen. I never say that this can happen, because we're human and we make different choices as we go along.
It's like, remember the old days before MapQuest? You'd go to AAA and get a triptych. I don't know if anybody's, maybe there's some in the audience, you're too young to know what that is,
I know
but
triptychs.
you'd get the paper, and it would show you, here's this little section in Maryland, or
Yep.
this little section in someplace else, and there would be little marks on the side, there are speed traps here. This is where you need to watch out. Well, it doesn't mean that you are going to get a ticket,
Right.
but it does mean that it is more likely the energy is such that this is what you need to be cautious
Right,
about while you're
right.
driving through this particular area.
And-
I think this is the same thing.
And my thing I always find interesting is the part when I'm doing a reading, and then when I stop to put out more cards and someone says, all that stuff you just told me, that's happened already. That's already happened. So I like when I hear that, because I know I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
And again, these are just a tool to confirm what's going on now and what could possibly go on.
Okay. I want to talk about one of my all-time favorite cards. I have it sitting in front of me. I think of it as the wish card. It's just one of the most beautiful cards of all in the deck. We'll get to that, and that one's the Ten of Cups. Cups being the equivalent of hearts, and cups connected with the element of water, the whole idea of the emotional connection. And you see this beautiful family, and they're happy, and the kids are happy, and it's sunny. I mean, and everything is beautiful. It's a wonderful card. Talk to me a little bit about the energy behind that card, and why that card, as opposed to maybe one of the other cards that has to do with like maximum money, why this card would be called the wish card.
Well, it's very much like the Nine of Hearts in the playing cards. And the Nine of Hearts in playing cards is always the wish card. And when I do the playing cards, I have people make a silent wish. I don't usually do it with the tarot, because if this shows up in the reading, it's just letting the person know in that situation what's going on, not to worry. It's going to be okay. It can show up around a situation for that person, or it could be around somebody else who might be having some difficulty. And for this to show up is very, very good. I mean, it's good for anybody, because it's just saying, it's not even saying keep your fingers crossed. It's saying, yay, you're out, you know, like in the Wizard of Oz, you're out of the woods, you know. It's a good card. It's one of my favorite cards too. So
it is for me too. Randy, first let me just mention to the audience, you know, in case you're watching and you're thinking, oh, I wish I could tell somebody else, oh, you missed this show, and you know, really wanted to be able to see it. All of our Full Bloom shows and our Page One shows are also on YouTube. So you can go to youtube.com/ZITA3x3, and you can see the interviews up there. So, you know, just in case you want to check this out again, tell your friends to watch. So, Randy, we don't have a lot of time left now, but I know that you do readings in person and you also do readings by phone. Is there any difference in the effectiveness?
There really isn't, and I have to tell you, when I first started doing phone readings, I didn't really know how it all would work out. And a friend of mine, my friend Bunzy, a fellow reader, she said phone readings are just as good as in person. I like in-person readings because the person's sitting with you. It's the same. It's the same thing.
On that good note, I have one final question. We have about 30 seconds. Imagine your grandmother and your mother are here. What would you say to them about the legacy that they've given you?
Well, I would say that it's still continuing on, and you know, that, like I always like to say, they're smiling down, and I always like to think that whenever I'm doing a reading for anybody, you know, they're always, you know, at my side. Yeah. And they're always there and rooting me on. And
that's a very positive image to close with. Thanks very much,
sure,
my guest, Randy Ouellette. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. And I love to close and tell a thank you to my FB crew and also to you in the viewing audience. I say this every week, and I mean it sincerely. I do know the value of time, and I appreciate that once again you chose to spend an evening with me. Thank you, and join us again next time. Bye-bye.
Full Bloom is brought to you in part by the following: